All right. Today on the podcast, I'm geeking out a little bit, like geeking out a bit, to be honest with you. I have an astronaut in the house. Karen Nyberg is the 50th woman to go into space, and she's here at my house. I'm so excited. Karen, thank you so much for showing up.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Okay, what made you decide that you wanted to be an astronaut?
I'm not sure, but it started when I was young.
Okay.
And so when I look back at it, I can kind of assume maybe what it was. So I turned 8 right before NASA selected the first class of astronauts that had women.
Okay.
And so I turned 8 in October, and then in January of 1978, this class, and you know, the space shuttle was under development at the time. I think there was probably a lot of news about NASA and everything. And anyway, about that age is when I started telling people I want to be an astronaut.
Oh, so you knew that young.
I did.
And it never changed into something else?
It never changed into something else.
Wow. Okay,
No.
so knowing that you wanted to be an astronaut, what are you studying?
I started looking that up actually when I was in high school, because I grew up in a really small town in Minnesota. And of my 5 siblings and me, only my oldest sister and I went to university. And so we didn't really know a lot of how you go and become things. And I had a friend in high school that suggested engineering. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I start looking at what other astronauts do and stuff. And sure enough, engineering is a great place to go if you're not military.
Okay.
So I decided to study mechanical engineering.
Okay. And so you study mechanical engineering, and then do you apply to be an astronaut, or how do you get selected to be an astronaut?
You apply, and they, back in the days when the space shuttle was flying a lot, they selected classes approximately every 2 years.
Okay, and how many are in a class?
And ours was 17 people. So it's anywhere, the largest class was in 1996. They selected like 40 something people. It was crazy huge. And then in 1998, they selected 30 something. These days, they select classes about every 4 years, and it's more like 10 to 15 people.
And how many people apply?
Thousands.
Thousands.
Yeah.
Okay. From all over the United States?
From all over the United States.
Okay.
Yeah. And so when I finished my undergraduate degree, I decided to go directly to graduate school. And I had been working as a student at the Johnson Space Center. I got a cooperative education job there, which was amazing, coming from small town Minnesota. And then I went to college in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And then got to spend some time down in Houston at the Johnson Space Center when I was still a student. But then I decided to go to graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin.
Okay.
And I graduated in 1998 with my PhD from there. And they were then put out a call for applications for the next astronaut class. And I was like, well, I'll apply. I have the minimum, I've got more than the minimum requirements now. And so I'm just going to put my name in the hat. I won't get selected this time.
But we always get the process.
I'll get the process started and learn, because we had heard, people have to apply multiple times. You just have to, persevere and keep going at it. And so I applied, and I just kept getting through the process.
And how many women do they try to have gender equal or any of that kind of stuff? Or are they really this is a skill we need, and whoever it is, whatever gender or color it shows up in, that's what it is?
It's a little bit of both. And
Okay.
so I've been on, since after becoming an astronaut and after flying in space, I was on the astronaut selection panel a few times. And so I got to see how it all happens. And we definitely try to go for diversity. And it's not just diversity in race and gender, it's also diversity in thought and diversity of background and all of that. And so there's so much that we look into. And the first time that I was on the board, NASA got 18,000 applications. Yeah.
18,000?
Yes. And so human resources narrowed it down to about 12,000. They took out people that didn't have the minimum qualifications. Okay. I don't have, this person doesn't have a degree. They haven't worked so many years. They don't have the minimum. And it was still about 12,000 people. And I was...
Is there an age range? If you don't get into the Navy SEALs by a certain age, then now you're not getting into it.
There is not. We do not have a cutoff for age.
Okay.
Generally the average age is usually about 35.
Okay.
But so we go through the process, and you start narrowing it down to, first you narrow it down to highly qualified. And we have astronauts and also other management at NASA looking at the applicants. You get it down to about 400 to 500 highly qualified. And at that point, everybody's qualified.
I can only imagine.
And then we start checking references and that sort of thing, and get it down to generally interviewing about 120 people who actually go to Johnson Space Center and go through some medical tests, go through some psychological tests, go through some operational, capability type tests, and then have an interview with the astronaut interview board. And at that point, it gets down to where you can start looking at, okay, we want medical doctors, or we want engineers, or we want pilots. Like, we're going to get a group that's a range of people.
Yep.
And we are going to look for men and for women and for minorities and for, we are going to get from this pool of very highly qualified people. And then, a lot of it comes down to, you sit in the interview, and if somebody is a me person,
done.
They're done. I don't care what's on your resume.
Yeah.
And we've gotten those. And you send the interview and I'm like, oh my God, this is
team sport, friend.
Wow.
Team sport, just to let you know.
So the questions we ask, it's like, to find out what kind of adverse conditions have they put themselves in? What kind of risk management have they had to do? And so a lot of people, that we hire are pilots already, are scuba divers, are mountain climbers, are athletes. You don't have to be, but
that shows like, hey, I've been in uncontrollable environments and have been able to have success.
Exactly.
Still.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So when you were getting through the process, we're like, how does one celebrate when they find out that they get to be an astronaut?
Well, it's interesting. So this was back in 2000.
Okay.
And I was actually working at the Johnson Space Center. So I had finished my doctorate in 98. I got hired by NASA. I was working there in Houston. And I got the call. I was at work.
Okay.
And it was Charlie Precourt, who was the head of the astronaut office. And he calls and he's like, just wondering, if you still want to join us or whatever. And we weren't supposed to tell anybody because they were letting us know, but they weren't going to announce the class. And so we weren't supposed to tell anybody. So I'm sitting in my desk and I'm like, and my boss was right next door to me and he knew I was applying. And he walked past and he knew exactly what that call was just by the way I...
Well, how do you hold that in?
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
And so I had to leave. I went home for the rest of the day because I can't... How do I not tell anybody?
Totally.
So I went home and then called, like my immediate family and let them know, don't tell anybody. And I was so nervous. Well, it turns out my boss the next day, he had to go to Building 1 to like this management meeting. And he mentioned it there, and I was like, "No, nobody's supposed to know." So I thought I was in trouble. This
You're like, you kicked me out of the program before I even started,
and it really wasn't a big deal. But
yeah, but still, I'd be freaking out. Okay, so were you married at the time or not yet?
No.
Okay, so because your husband's an astronaut too,
yeah.
So how did that evolve? Because he was in your class.
He was in my class. So Doug Hurley is his name. He was a Marine Corps fighter test pilot. And so he was one of the pilots selected in my class. We had, in our class, it was 3 women, 7 military. And so yeah, we met and, we're just all group friends for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
And then started dating around probably 2008 or something.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you get selected to be an astronaut, not everybody's going to space, right? In that class. How does that look? Because you went to space. You went to space twice. Or if you're an astronaut, now you're guaranteed to go to space.
There are some that have not, but in general, you probably will. So the first 2 years after you're selected, you're called, it's an astronaut candidate.
Yep.
That's what you're called. And we start with some generic training. Like when I started, we started learning everything there was to know about the space shuttle. The space station was just being built at the time. So we started learning, it was kind of the early training program for the space station. So we learned everything about the space station. We learned the Russian language because the space station, we have the US segment and the Russian segment. So we learned Russian language.
Can you speak Russian?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the astronaut candidate for 2 years, and you just learn all these general things. And then after that 2-year period of time, you get pinned on, like we call it, as an astronaut. And you get a little silver astronaut wings pin.
Okay.
And then after you fly in space, you get a gold one. But so at that point, after the 2 years, you're eligible to be assigned to a space flight. And ideally,
do you get to pick the space flight or not?
No. So that's something that happens. The chief of the astronaut office works with, they kind of look at the manifest of what flights are coming. They look at people's, so it's kind of in order, like the class, we had to wait for everybody in the 1998 class to fly pretty much before we got assigned. So it's kind of in order. But then it's what skills you have. Do we need somebody? Do we need this person, what your skills are? The group dynamics. There's a lot of factors that go in and to the mission assignments.
Yeah, because you spent 6 months in space, right?
I did on my second flight.
On your second flight. And how long was your first flight?
About 14 days.
14 days. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, the first flight was on Space Shuttle, and we were building the space station. And so space shuttle flights are shorter. They were usually about 2 weeks. And so we took up the Japanese laboratory, went to the space station, spent probably 9 or 10 days there, did all the work, took it out of the payload bay, attached it, activated the lab and all that. My crewmates did some spacewalks. We did a lot of, that type of work.
What's the point of doing a spacewalk?
So there's different mechanisms that are outside. There are different boxes that are outside that need to be either repaired or replaced. But we can do, like for when we installed the Japanese lab, there were things that had to be done manually outside in the vacuum of space to get it installed properly.
Yeah. So how do you handle that extreme isolation?
I honestly never felt isolated.
Okay.
So the space shuttle itself, there were 7 of us on the space shuttle when we launched. It's not that small. I mean, it's, there's the flight deck and a mid deck, and we were only in that for a couple days as we approached space station, and then a couple days after. And then on space station is pretty huge.
Okay.
On my shuttle flight, there were 3 people there living. We've had somebody living nonstop since 2000 on space station. So
we have.
For 25 years, we've had human beings nonstop living there. So there were 10 of us in space at one time. But the space station, the internal volume is like a 5-bedroom house or bigger.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty. And when I was there for my long duration flight in 2013, it was about 5.5 months. And we have an internet protocol phone. I could call home pretty much anytime. You just had to have Ku-band antenna coverage. So I called my husband at least once a day.
Yes.
Maybe
you made little videos for Jack. I saw that.
I made little videos for Jack every day. Except for one day, I was there 166 days. And when I went back to look at the videos, I have 165 of them. And I was like, what happened? And so October 5th, for some reason, I missed October 5th.
It was an exciting day.
I don't know what happened.
Maybe you forgot to hit record, right?
Maybe. I don't know what happened.
It's a unique day. That's going to stay in your mind forever. October 5.
I know, I feel so bad.
How
did I
funny.
miss that?
And how was that being a mom going to space with the little guy?
It was hard. It was harder on me than him, I think.
Always.
And it started with making the decision. Do I go do this 6-month mission? And yes, I'm going to go do this. I talked to my husband and I talked about it, and we're like,
it's
yes.
6 months, it's the rest of your life.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's when you've had this dream your whole life. What kind of message does this give to him when he's an adult? Well, mom decided not to continue her dream because of, you know what I mean?
Oh, I live that. Believe you me, preaching to the choir.
And so he was 3. And so, what does he understand? You don't really know. And so I tried to just make it a familiar thing for him. And he met my crewmates, so he would know who I was living with there. We would watch the space station go over, and, mommy's going to live up there, and just make him a part of it,
Yeah.
And that's why I decided to send a video every day to him, just a short little video. And pictures were sent to me of him throughout the day. Our nanny would take a bunch of pictures and send them up. And then we had a video conference, 2-way video conference every weekend that NASA would set up for us.
Were you ever worried about not coming home?
No. The interesting thing, though, at about a couple weeks before we're scheduled to come home, we start packing things up, and NASA will send up, some equipment we need to pack up to bring home, and they'll kind of give us a list, and we start packing things and labeling it and getting it. And once we started that process of packing to go home,
You're ready to go home.
I was ready to go home. And if the flight had been lengthened at that point, I think there would have been the little bit of the internal struggle of being stuck there.
Yeah.
But which you would have readjusted what the expectations were. But that, that expectation, I'm going home on this day. And luckily I did. Everything was on time. So.
Okay. So what's the scariest moment you've ever had in space?
Easily spacewalk related.
Okay.
So my crewmates, Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano, they had 2 spacewalks scheduled. They did one spacewalk, and my job was to get them suited up to put them into the crew lock, close the hatch, depressurize it to vacuum. Then they open the external hatch and then I get them back
How does
in.
that feel on your body? Or because you're in the suit, you don't notice it that bad? Or do you feel it when all that pressure changes?
Since I haven't done it in space,
Okay.
I've only done it in the pool, which is the buoyancy part of it is like 0G, but the rest of it isn't necessarily. So
the same.
I think you only feel it, the pressure differential when you're moving moving the gloves and you can feel that pressure.
Yep.
But on their second spacewalk then, I got them suited up, did all my stuff, and then I was going to be done until they had like a 6-hour spacewalk, and then I would do other things. I was going to run on the treadmill and do things like that. And then I was listening to the comm inside the space station, and Luca said something about having water in his helmet, and they were talking to Houston, trying to figure out, we have a drink bag in there, so maybe the drink bag was leaking. And then we also have a liquid cooling garment that runs through, it's like a pair of long underwear with tubes, basically, and that's how you stay cool in the suit. And then the water goes through a sublimator to cool off. And so maybe that is leaking. And finally, he had so much water that they aborted the spacewalk. And then I'm back in the game now. I had to go to the airlock. And Luca came to back to the crew lock. Then Chris cleaned up a few things and came, and they were in the crew lock, and I'm looking at them through the hatch. We're doing some, going through the procedures. They had some switches to flip. And so I was talking to them, and we couldn't hear Luca talk anymore, but I would tell him something and he would take an action. Okay. So I'm like, okay, he hears me. Well, there was one point where he stopped responding. And at this point, he had water. It was everywhere. In his ears. It was going up his nose. And we're like, okay, he could drown, literally. Because in space, the way water behaves, like he said, he shook his head like this, and it's just a ball of water, and his head just kind of went under this ball of water. It doesn't splash off. It doesn't, it's in the helmet.
Right.
And so I got very scared for a second, and I was repressurizing the airlock at that time, and repressurizing there's a nominal rate where you're not going to bust eardrums and that sort of thing.
Right.
But there's also an emergency repress if needed. I just turn the valve, and then it just floods it with air, and everybody's, Chris's eardrums would have popped and Lucas would have popped. And I was this close to doing that because I'm like, he's drowning. And so I'm standing there, and then finally Chris said, Lucas squeezed my hand. Because I think he was making sure. I'm like, okay.
He was letting us know, yeah.
He was letting everybody know that he's fine. So because he wasn't hearing us anymore, we weren't hearing him because his comm cap was completely
flooded. Yeah.
And so anyway, so then luckily I didn't do that because that would have been bad. But anyway, we got him at the nominal time then and brought him in and took his helmet off. We did an expedited suit doffing, it's called, and got his helmet off. And our Russian crew members came down with towels and everything. It was really neat to see it come together because it was the teamwork and everything we trained for, where you don't have to talk about it. Everybody just does something. Yeah. So that part of it, and then working with mission control in Houston at the same time, and that part of it was a good test of our training and how all that. But it was scary.
Isn't it amazing? Like when those near-death experiences happen, and I've been in the mountains enough to have them happen there, and everybody just that training is critical, and that's where you see it.
Absolutely,
right? Like when things are going good, every team looks the same.
Yep.
When something goes wrong, all of a sudden the water runs out, and you know who's trained and who's not. And it is mind-blowing. On a happier topic, I mean, he's safe, he's fine, no one blew an eardrum, you acted perfect, everybody did their job. What is it like to see, the world from space?
That is, I think, by far the best part of being in space.
It has to be.
It's very profound, actually, and it's, I wish I was a poet sometimes, to think. So the first time I saw Earth on my shuttle flight, we got to orbit, had a few tasks to do, and then an hour or so after we get there, we have to open the payload bay doors. And when the first one opened, I looked out, I'm like, I had never in my life seen anything so vibrant.
Oh.
It just unbelievably vibrant blue. And the blackness of space is so incredibly black that it's just, I don't even know how to describe it. And it's overwhelming, this. And when we orbit, we're only about 230, 250 miles off the surface of the Earth. So we're not that far away from it.
Okay.
But at the same time, you get this sense of what it is. And it's just, I mean, amazing. And then that shuttle flight was so busy that I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time just looking out the window. But when I lived on station for 5.5 months, we have on one of the modules this cupola, which is windows facing nadir towards Earth. And it's 7 windows. There's a large round window that faces directly towards Earth, and then 6 windows around. And you just go sit there and just sit in awe. And it's absolutely amazing. I mean, and it really gives you a sense of Earth being home. And I had one of my colleagues, Don Pettit, who's actually in space right now on his third space flight? Fourth? Cool. I don't even know.
Is there a limit? Is there only so many times you can go? No, you can keep going? Okay, perfect.
But he described it once like, when you go to a neighboring town or you go into town for food and you come home as you're getting in your driveway, I'm like, oh, I'm home.
Yeah.
Then as you go to a neighboring town and you come back into your town, as soon as you drive into the town past the sign, you're like, I'm home. When you leave the state, you land back in the state and you're like, I'm home. You leave the country, you go to Russia for training, you land back in the US, I'm home. And when you go to space, when you land on Earth, even if it's the steppes of Kazakhstan, I'm home. And that's true,
Right.
It's like Earth is our home.
Okay, as a woman in aerospace and engineering, what were some of the biggest barriers you faced? And how did you overcome them? Because you do a lot to help women with STEM and all that kind of stuff now.
Yeah. I never really saw anything as a barrier. When I started studying engineering, there were very few women in any of my classes, especially mechanical engineering. And I graduated. When I graduated from the University of North Dakota, there were maybe 5 out of, it was probably about 15% women. I don't remember the total in my class, but it was about 15% women. But I don't know, I guess I just never felt like there was through that anything. And then when I got to NASA, NASA is very much a meritocracy. I mean, it's great. We've got a lot of women in leadership roles.
It's funny that you say that. No, because I started my career in finance, which was male dominated, might still be to this day. But I never really I was one of 3 women at a conference, but I never really noticed it. Like it wasn't something I paid attention to.
Yeah.
It was like, we have a competition on who gets more business. I'm going to beat you. So let's go. Right. Like, it was never like, I don't know. It's just interesting.
I think the biggest thing was like when I was talking about the spacesuits earlier
yes.
And there were some smaller males as well who had, but in general, the women were structured, and the hard bearings for your shoulders. I mean, when they land they don't land at your shoulders, you can't. And it took a while in the training, the spacewalk training. It used to be, we kind of would joke, the good old boys club where, if you haven't spacewalked, you can't spacewalk. And if you didn't do well in the first 2 or 3 times that you're in the suit in the pool, then you're not going to be able to do it. But they've kind of changed the way that they train now, realizing that there are things that smaller people need to overcome in the pool in order to be successful spacewalker, like buoyancy. We're simulating zero gravity with neutral buoyancy. Well, when your suit is too big for you and you change positions in the pool, there's still gravity. And so your body falls in the suit and the air changes. And so your buoyancy changes. And so the first couple runs when you're training, you're just trying to overcome all these things where I can't get a full reach. I have to do this in order for my shoulder to move. And every time I move, my buoyancy changes and I'm fighting against it. And the suit is heavy. And so once they decided, okay, we're going to give them more time. Now, I mean, we've had lots of women do spacewalks and there's no problem, but it was getting to the point of changing the training so that people had time to overcome the idiosyncrasies of not having a suit that fits you.
Yeah. All those things, right? Like the more you've talked today, the more and there's that detail, and there's that detail, and there's that detail. Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. Huh. Yeah. Crazy. Okay. So you're an artist. How did space influence your career in artistry?
Well, I've always been interested in art. I used to when I was little. In fact, it was probably a bigger passion than space was, to be honest. My spare time, I didn't like ask for a telescope, and I wasn't this.
Like,
but I just
tracking the stars.
Right.
Can you go outside and know where all the stars are? Like, are you one of them? No, that's okay.
I can find Orion and the Big Dipper and a few others.
Right.
But I loved art and I loved sewing. My mom used to sew and make a lot of our clothes and stuff like that. And so I just loved doing that. And I kept it as a hobby the whole time I was in school. I took a couple, classes on drawing, and, I would make things for people. I would sew blankets for people, quilts and things. But I was really excited, okay, what am I going to do when I retire from the astronaut program, which is hard to do. It's hard to retire from something that has been so.
I can't even imagine, because that's a new identity.
Yeah, exactly.
So thankfully you had this hobby the entire
time. And I was like, I want to be able to work from home for a couple of reasons. One, so I'm there for Jack.
Yep.
I want to be the one to take into practice and do stuff. Because there was so much time where I was just traveling and not being able to do that. And then I want to be able to work on art and sewing. And so I took a couple retreats on learning art quilts and different techniques for that, and then kind of just put them together and kind of doing my own. And then I also have a couple fabric lines where definitely space influenced that, because like my first fabric line was called Earth Views.
Oh.
And it was from pictures I took of Earth.
Yeah.
Which was one of my favorite hobbies in space, was taking pictures of Earth. And it's in fabric. And then the second line of fabric is a batik line called Orbital Sunrise. And the colors I took from one of the pictures of a sunrise from orbit.
How important do you think having a hobby is when you have these high pressure or high stress or high detailed jobs to keep resilience going?
It was important for me. I mean, there were times when I would, and it usually happened between Thanksgiving and Christmas, only because I was making gifts for people. And so but I could spend, literally, I had a hard time going to bed because I'm working on something. But the mind can just go completely to something unrelated to whatever the stressors or the task is that you've been working on. And so to me, it was really important.
Yeah, no, I think for me too. And it just gave my brain a place to play and let go instead of continuously trying to figure things out or solve or whatever. Right. It was more okay, how does this show up?
And running is that way for me too. Running and just kind of letting the mind. Yeah.
So what made you decide to retire finally?
Well, after my flight in 2013, I knew I wasn't going to fly again.
Okay.
I did have an opportunity, but I felt like I had reached my dream.
You did your thing.
It's hard on a family when, especially with both of us being astronauts. We had a period of time between 2008, my first flight. Doug flew in 2009. We got married, had Jack in 2010. He flew again in 2011. I flew in 2013. It's just like a lot of disruption in the beginning. It was so much. And then he was in the group that was going to fly the test flights of the new vehicles. Shuttle had retired, so SpaceX and Boeing were making crewed vehicles for NASA to use. And so he ended up getting assigned to the test flight for the SpaceX Dragon. And so it just doesn't make sense for me to go again. There's no reason I need to. And there's other classes of astronauts behind me who have earned that, and they are excited to go. And so there's no reason for me. NASA doesn't need me to go do it. And so yeah. And I kind of wanted to just start doing more art and stuff.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah. So I do think it's important to have other things to go into when you let go of one identity. So
Absolutely.
You have another identity to step and hold on to.
I think that's really important. And I've seen people struggle a little bit with,
I'm sure.
You retire from what you've known and being, and doing something that's so thrilling.
Yes.
And then just, yeah.
And now welcome to everyday life. You're going to go get milk and butter at the grocery store and feel good. Figure that out. So, no, I totally understand. Okay, so with the rise of commercial space travel, where do you see humanity going in the future?
We're definitely at a change it's interesting to see the changes, the early days, where it was all men were astronauts and it was all military folks and and then we went to the shuttle days where we kind of opened it up to other people and now kind of into the commercial where we're seeing a lot of people just doing suborbital flights, where like on Blue Origin and stuff where they go, it's just a couple minutes of wait list and come back. And so they're getting just that experience of seeing the Earth from space, even though it's just a short period of time. But, NASA right now is working on going back to the moon and actually having a little bit more sustainable time there. Hopefully that continues. I'm not sure where NASA is with the goals because every administration things change, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's got to be hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. It always is. And so who knows? And I'm not privy to what's the details, what's going on at NASA right now since I'm not there. But it's definitely, it's changing access, who can go. SpaceX has had 2 non-NASA flights called, Jared Isaacman paid for the flight and have had a crew of 4 that orbited Earth for like 4 days. And so more things like that will happen where it's not NASA. Mm-hmm. And then in kind of the idea, and then also there's private companies building space stations, designing space stations, because the International Space Station was launched in the first component in 1998, the first crew in 2000, and it was designed initially for 15 years. Well, it's been 25. And so eventually it's past its useful life where we're doing more maintenance than it's worth doing. And so the idea is that commercial companies have the space stations, the access to space, and NASA can then concentrate on more, exploration further from, go back to the moon, look at what it takes to go to Mars and do those sorts of things.
I think it's just fascinating, isn't it? I just love it.
Yeah.
I love like human innovation and creativity and how once we get to this spot, like the path that it creates for others to get to there and then where that allows everybody goes to launch the next place. Yeah, that's great to be a human. It truly is. I'm like, this experience is, I'm here for it, 100%. So everybody that's listening, like you're this powerhouse female that had dreams and went after them and gave yourself permission to shift from one to another. What advice would you give people that are like trying to figure that out themselves?
First, just do it.
Yes.
Yeah. And, the whole time, I decided I wanted to be an astronaut when I was little, and it was a far-fetched dream. A lot of kids say they want to be astronauts. But every step of the way, I was like, okay, is this going to help me get there? And if I don't get there, am I still doing something that I enjoy? Yeah. I don't want to pick mechanical engineering if I don't like it just because it might help me get there. I want to pick it because I'm going to enjoy it when I do not become an astronaut. And so making decisions like that. I decided that I wanted to learn to scuba dive. Now, should I learn to scuba dive just because that might help me become an astronaut? No, I should learn to scuba dive because I want to learn how to scuba dive and I think it's enjoyable and I might use it as a hobby later or whatever.
Yeah, and you will fall in love with the underwater world when you scuba dive. It's like, you're just like, there's that color in this universe in an animal or in a plant. This is amazing.
But just going and getting out of your comfort zone, doing things that, like I used to absolutely hate, I'm very introverted and shy, and public speaking was terrifying. Guess what? I have to do it.
You have to.
And
because you have to share your story, so you get good at it.
You just get out of your comfort zone and you go do it. And a lot of things like that. And then also getting over, the imposter syndrome part of it, which there's that too. The first time when I was at the University of North Dakota, and the first time I went down for my first work tour at NASA when I was a student in the cooperative education program, I remember meeting all the other students from around the nation and feeling like, oh my gosh, I do not belong with these kids are smart and they're this and I don't belong, and so
why do you think we do that?
I don't know. And I still do it now, like in the quilting and art world. I'm like, well, I'm not quite good enough to do this.
It's so silly that we do that to ourselves.
Yeah. But I guess the key is just keep
going. Even if that emotion or thought comes up, just be like, thank you for showing up. I'm going to continue.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, this has been such an honor. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to have this
100%.
chat.
We'll do it again.
We should
anytime you
do it
want.
again.
We live next door to each other. This is here. I love
Next
it.
time we'll talk about mountain climbing.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds
There's a
good.
lot of similarities, actually.
There is a lot of
I think there's a lot of
similarities.
similarities.
I think there's a
in them.
lot of similarities to any of us that are achieving these massive goals or building these companies into things that we don't have established yet or whatever.
Right.
Like there's such a parallel.
Yeah, there
And
really
it's
is.
so, that's what's fun. Like when you've done it there, now you get to apply all those things to like the quilting world, right?
Right.
I mean, it's there too. It's in every single
Yeah.
thing we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so fun.
Definitely.
Well, thank you.